start to this panel discussion, sir, what exactly do we mean as an endangered species?
As an endangered species?
Yes, sir.
Well, it all depends on the human angle of looking at the animal or plant. The problem with the endangerment idea, unfortunately, is the criteria from which you make that decision. But for a general purpose, we may say endangerment species is anything that we think is at the brink of extinction or has crashed in terms of its population to a number that is decimally smaller than what we have known in the past. And we may recall this as the means to determining whether an area is a biologically hotspot. But there is a misnomer that you have to clarify for yourself when you say Sri Lanka is a hotspot. We are a hotspot along with the Western Ghats. Sri Lanka's wet zone comes in with the Western Ghats as part of these 36 locations identified by Conservation International according to a criteria primarily established in 1988 by Norman Mayers. Now, unfortunately, the animals don't have any role in that, because the most important criteria there is the presence of endemic vascular plants. It says 0.5% or 1,500 endemic vascular plants. And the second one, of course, is loss of original habitat. So if you take the wet zone, there is no question, we have only 3% of the original forest that we would have had in the wet zone with respect to the total land area of Sri Lanka. So you take that and look at the endemicity of plants in Sri Lanka. Also, we know very clearly that we have the highest endemicity of plants in the wet zone. So it qualifies in both ways, and it is tagged along with the Western Ghats for this purpose. Now, as I say, the animals don't come into this picture. So how do you decide this? Now, the sad part of decision making in the process of threatened species prior to 1998, if I'm not mistaken, or 93, somewhere there, before IUCN, who was doing in 1986, I think this was started by IUCN. They used criteria to find out whether a species is threatened or not, and that was very much what I call subjective. If Humali thinks that this animal is threatened because I don't see it every day, it is threatened. If you have credibility to enable it to be published, you get the credit for it. Now, this was the case till Mace and Land came around and said, look, this is not going to work. You need data to enable to understand whether a species is threatened or not. Now, they brought up a very interesting model, which is what is being used today with the IUCN, for which you have to have information about the distribution and the decline of a given species. If not, you don't get a good idea of whether the species is threatened or not. I will complete by giving this very simple example, which I think all of the people who are here, 173 participants or 72 without me, knows very well. If I say it in the singular word, Pandu Karanda, you might not know. But if I tell it to you, Crudia silanica, you may know. You see a plant was on this trace of the highway, and we made a huge fuss, jumping out and shouting that this was an extinct plant, which unfortunately was what was said in the literature. And then Himesh Jayasinha finds it, and then he reports it, and then it becomes the only tree in the whole country. Then there was another plant, at least in the garden. They should have at least consulted that, they didn't do. And then we know now it is even outside the endangerment listing today. 2020, vascular plants endangerment listing for Sri Lanka takes Crudia silanica out. Now, I am using this example because this is the pitfall that everybody falls into when we think of an endangered species. In the Mace and Land classification, there is a very clear distinction that if you do not have information, we call it data deficient and we put it aside. We are scientists. So the subjective decisions are not good enough for making very crucial decisions about a plant. Now imagine if we had to spend over 80 million to divert the highway, where would you find that money? Or we would have to then go just bulldoze over that tree and go, right? The information comes in, the decision can change. So endangered species are decided today, not on subjectivity, but on objectivity. Science. Now, unfortunately, in Sri Lanka, I am sad to say that we have shifted away from the objectivity, maybe because it's not just a feature of Sri Lanka, it's a feature across the world, because I have been involved in this for a long, long time, but I don't get involved in Sri Lanka because of the subjectivity picture that has crept into the decision making. It's the same in many other countries. I know it, I don't know it, I have seen it, I have not seen it in my last 5 years or 6 years, and you make a decision on that. Until we are willing to agree to say data deficient, young future generation scientists would not have anything to work with. You will only try to work with these species that are referred to as endangered because they are very charismatic. And you may be going on the wrong path. So I would think in this discussion, you should emphasize the fact that it's not numbers. I can show you numbers of 2007 and 2012. And now we are still awaiting the 10 years after that also. Every 5 years we were going to have it. I think, as I said, we are afraid to say that we don't have data. To me, that is not an issue. If we don't have data, we don't have data. And if we are concerned about our fauna and flora to save them for the future, collect the data. And that data will come not from old guys like us, but it will come from the guys like you, who will be willing to do the data collection to establish the fact that the species is threatened or not.
Well, sir, that was a very interesting and in detailed description about the endangered species. Moving on to the second question, various unavoidable human activities have resulted in a disastrous impact on endangered species in Sri Lanka. So what kind of hopes can environmentalists keep within themselves on the survival of endangered species?
Well, let's take an example of what I just used earlier. If we know for a fact that we have only roughly about 3% of the natural forest of the red zone, looking at the information that is available about the endemicity of organisms in this country, we know that, I would say, I may be wrong, but as a percentage, I would say maybe around 70 to 80% or more endemics are found in the red zone as of the studies that we have today of the mega larger fauna, especially, and the trees, vascular plants, because much of the work has not been done. We have not been studying the nitty-gritty small organisms in either group. Right now, this is against the global picture where we only have 12% of the biodiversity identified. Now, it might surprise the listeners. What do you mean by 12% of the biodiversity in the world? It is because I am Professor Sarath Kotagama, moderated by Pumili Samrakon. We all have a label. If you don't have this label, you don't exist. Right? Even if you exist, you will be floating off somewhere. And how will you call the person? That is what you will do, because you can't name the person and call. So the nomenclature that has been introduced into science to name the animals tells us how many is present. So within that frame itself, the loss of forest in the red zone is the principal factor. Now, can we bring it back? Would we, when bring back the species that we have lost? We don't know. To be frank, we don't know. But what we can do, therefore, is at least ensure that the last remaining 3% of natural forest in the wet zone is protected at all cost. And of course, there are many other natural systems like streams and slopes and crevices of rocks and so many other places. But our focus has not been in many of those micro habitats. Our focus has been basically on the big picture with the big animals and big forest. Now, in the big animal story, if you take Sri Lanka, there are only apparently 2 elephants in the wet zone. In the Rakwana range, we have been told that there are only 2 elephants and 2 are males. So if the 2 are males, there is no chance that we are going to have the next generation in the wet zone. So they are doomed. We would say they are on the way to extinction in that sense. Extirpated. They will be extirpated from the wet zone, meaning that they will get lost. If we want to make them survive, we can. And I don't see any reason why not. I don't see any reason why not. Others may not think that way, but I don't see any reason why we shouldn't introduce a female in that area, or females, because if you have 2 males, you need females. You can't have a female, right? Because the system, social system is such that, and let them go back. But then you have a question. Is there enough habitat for that species to survive in the wet zone? So these are the questions that we need to answer your question. If we can ensure that we can rehabilitate or regenerate the naturalness needed for those species that have gone to the brink in the endangerment or in the threatened, critically endangered level, and enable them to be comfortable and expand, yes, we have hope. But that hope will come only if we recognize first that I have a problem or we have a problem. How much of the people of this country recognize that we have a problem with biodiversity being threatened? Second, are we ready to change the present if we recognize that our actions of the past is the cause for that situation? Very simply those two. If you can enable those two to happen, we have a chance. And I think we are better off than where we were many years ago.
We wish we had a lot of time to listen to these, but due to time constraints, one last question, sir.
Yeah,
So what are the ongoing projects that are being carried out in order to safeguard the endangered animals?
Right. Okay. I can't give you specifics, but I know that the Biodiversity Secretariat has been giving off some grants for certain species like Bandula petia and all that for trying what is a very, very important aspect to take the fish from where it is in the very restricted, limited area, try to conserve it in that area and allow it to grow back, and also translocate it into other waters. I know long time ago, my good old friend Ranil Senanayak also did this by taking fish from one place to another place and seeing whether it will work. Relocation of species. And we know, for example, I don't know the species, is offhand, so I can't tell you, but I know when the Muskelia, at Muskelia under the bridge, when it went underwater, mollusks and some other species were translocated and they are surviving. So some work mostly funded by the Biodiversity Secretariat, and individuals are working on these things to try and understand the current distribution or current biology of species. But they're all looking at what I call the charismatic species. The ones that give a picture: leopard, elephant. Beyond that, cats, they are all good, fine. They are all there, the mega big sizes. But if you really look at it, it is the smaller ones that need better attention, because the big ones you can somehow probably do something, right? But the smaller ones, when you have no information, it is lost. Assessments we have done from time to time to recognize whether we have adequate species in that, but have we done adequate assessments of species to assess whether they are threatened? the question is, I would say no. That is one of the very, very good reasons why we have not been able, after even 10 years, to try and get the next threatened list of Sri Lanka since 2012. And as I told you earlier, objective assessments are not good at all to me, because that can be wrong, and it has become wrong. You can see what happened with the Prudia. So are we doing enough, and are we been pushing the story? To me, I am sad that it is not. And that is where the younger generation has to come in. Unless you all are willing to start to look at the nitty-gritty, which is not easy, I know that, but you must have a passion for the field first, right? Not under COVID, but when the COVID goes away, if you have the passion to be in the field, you will realize that there is a whole heap of things out there which require your attention. If not, we will go down this line and we will come back maybe another 50 years or 100 years later and say, hey, look at it. The threatened species have increased and most species have gone extinct. And you're talking about extinction of the only species that we have documented. If there is 80% of fish, of organisms to be identified yet, right? What would be their future? We don't know at all. So I think the answer to your question is, there are some committed staff, committed scientists who are working, but totally inadequate. We need more, and we need to push this stronger among the new budding scientists of the future.
Thank you very much, sir, for the very informative and interesting session that I'm sure enlightened all of us here today.